Hi, everyone. My name is Phil Blancato. I'm CEO and president of Ladenburg Thalmann Asset Management, chief market strategist for Osaic. A lot of brightness over here. Let me close one of the windows. That's a little better. There we go. Oh, it's still real bright. Hold on. I hate to do this to you. Okay. It's still real bright. I guess it doesn't matter. I'll leave it open. It's more fun. Reason why I leave it open, we have snow outside. A lot of it. We had the craziest day yesterday where it started snowing basically late yesterday's Sunday's late Friday night, and basically snowed all on and off all day Saturday here in New Jersey. And it was kind of weird, fluffy, fun snow, and then it got real cold. But a buddy of mine works for the town, my buddy Joe Farrow across the street. And he went out and was basically gone the entire day because it snowed a couple inches in the morning and then we took a break. And then it snowed a couple inches in the afternoon and took a break. And then it snowed again at the end of the day. So all in, it's probably, I don't know, 5, 6 inches, nothing crazy. And the way it snowed made it easy to clean. But it is what it is. It's winter and we're getting cold this week. I don't know right where you are. The girls down in Athens are frigid. They're freezing down there. They're down in the 30s down there. And then at nighttime, they're down in the 20s. That doesn't happen in Athens, Georgia. They might even get some snow. They called school off a couple of the days. Oh my God. It's not like it's 6 inches of snow or something. Luca is in a softball program. She's a very good softball player. And she has to take PE. What a waste of money, by the way, in her senior year. And because her counselor released her schedule, something like this. Too late. She missed out on getting into the golf program because she wanted to learn how to play golf. So she went the next best thing, which was softball. Well, she's a darn good softball player. So what I do, I sent her down some bats. She's going to have a hoop playing softball. But the point is, they canceled practice. Why? Well, that's easy because it's too cold. You can't make this stuff up. Too cold. Oh my God, the world's coming to an end. And then we complain all the time that of global warming. Well, I guess it's climate change now. I don't know. I did read recently that the ozone layer is in great repair. And for all those years of aerosols, it goes to show you if we put our mind to something, things can get straightened out. All those years of excessive aerosols in the air eroded the ozone layer, and now it's mostly repaired. It's in excellent shape and should be repaired by sometime completely repaired in the next 5 to 10 years. It could be longer than that, depending on our pollution, but certainly that matters. Fascinating piece over the weekend I read about power. And in the great demand for power, there's going to be this piece, this idea that will AI companies, Google, ChatGPT, whatever, Perplexity, will they all be willing to pay more for power because it's not fair to the person who doesn't use AI? If you haven't noticed, I've mentioned this before, that when you use an AI bot, it takes 10 times more power for every AI click versus a non-AI click, traditional web search. That's problematic. I mean, that's a problem. So now whether it's Google or Meta or any of them having to pay for their own power, rather than face blackouts this summer, and we're having too much demand, especially if we get a hot summer, or this winter, if it stays cold next week in New Jersey, we're not going to make it out of the 20s for 4 or 5 days in a row. Well, in those scenarios, there's going to be real revolt around AI and where power comes from. One of the pieces I read was that places like Massachusetts which is try to be an extremely progressive state when it comes to their energy, being 100% green. Their energy bills are through the roof. They're even higher than New Jersey, which is up 18% year over year. They don't really get any, they still use fossil fuels, but to bring natural gas into Boston, for example, they got to bring it in by freight, liquefied natural gas down from New Orleans, Louisiana area, because they won't have a pipeline go to their natural gas terminals. Natural gas is 50% less hydrocarbons than traditional oil or coal. Some of the stuff is crazy. So the time when it's cold outside and the energy prices are expensive, you would think there's a rethinking of some of this stuff. But anyway, the ozone layer is better and it's cold in Georgia. How well disconnected in my mind. This is what I do. This is some of the stuff just connects. Forgive me. I can't help myself. I get on a rant and the data in my brain just starts connecting and plugs things together. Anyway, hopefully you're warm where you are. You can see Whiskey's crate kind of in the background back there. That dog is full of life. Oh my gosh, this little thing she just doesn't quit and drives poor Stella, the older dog, crazy. It's kind of a comical scene in my house right now. But besides that, hopefully you're having a wonderful weekend. And for me, Monday, the markets are closed. In memory of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'll talk a great quote from him in a little while from now. I think I want to start today with first off, Marcella's fine because everyone asked me she's back at school and doing great. She made homemade eggplant last night, and supposedly it came out wonderful. So good for her. She's learning how to cook. And I made a really cool dish this weekend. Just I'll quickly start there. I had some leftover sauce. So I took the sauce, I took a frying pan, I took anchovies. I know you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the anchovies are really spicy. Put them in with a lot of bit of oil, the stem of a parsley stalk, and garlic, and brown it. And I took a dried hot pepper, chop it up real thin, throw it in there, get a real spicy, oily sauce. Let it all simmer down. Put the sauce, my homemade sauce, on top of it. Let it all simmer. Let a half pound of good pasta. Throw it on top. Delicious. I mean, that probably cost me $1 to make. But anyway, that was my quick family recipe. That was my dinner yesterday. It was quite good. Anyway, I wanted to just for a minute talk about where we're going in the world of, for example, the latest is Greenland coming out of the president. And the president's got to be careful. His approval rating in most categories, other than to a lesser degree, the border. He gets high marks for the border across the board, both Democrat and Republican. But beyond that, his exporting people, 50% say he's gone too far. Policies on the economy, 50% say they're worse off. And in just about every category. He was even lost losing Joe Rogan, his big fan there. The things are that he's losing him in his camp. And the latest is Greenland. I'm not playing politics. My point is it's another headline. And I read a piece just over the day that said he's pretty soon going to be a lame duck president because he's lost two Republican senators. And if he loses two more, he won't get another thing passed. Then it all comes down to presidential order, which we know that's going to be extremely messy. So as we head spiral, kind of bounce towards the midterms here, the president's trying desperately to get these approval rating turned around, whether that's not charging a penalty for student loans who are behind in their payment, trying to cap credit cards at 10% maximum, trying to force big banks to not buy up housing, all these things. But reality to me that was crazy is the expectations for the economy are quite good. We've talked about a tailwind in the form of lower taxes across the board. That should make consumers happy. A tailwind in the form of gasoline, a headwind in the form of energy prices, but usually that gets a little quieter in the spring going into summer because you use less energy. A somewhat of a headwind because of tariffs, but we've proven that hasn't been too expensive for Americans, really. And in fairness, probably costs more money. There's an issue around healthcare, that healthcare got more expensive on January 1. And reality is, that really hasn't been worked out. So for the average person out there, we looked at inflation for the average person who makes less than $100,000 a year because they're so dependent on healthcare and energy and miscellaneous food costs that could be up still. They're not happy. Their costs are higher. Point is, I think the president is got to wedge himself into a corner, taking on tariffs before he took on the economy. I think that probably was a strategic mistake. He's fighting the Federal Reserve, another headline that's out there, considering broad-based tariffs on anyone who opposes his right to take over Greenland. Now, the Greenland thing, in a pragmatic way, is that the right way to say it? I guess I understand it, why it's central to, military needs and minerals, but there's no world wars anymore. Are we really going to go to war with Russia or China? We need Greenland to be our defense mechanism. That seems a bit strong. I would think they'd come to a peace treaty or some sort of agreement with Greenland. By the way, there's only 55,000 people that live there, and the country loses money year over year. So there's something that could be done to better it. But certainly, this idea of broad-based tariffs on all EU partners who oppose him. So we go back to where we were, places like Canada and the European Union sending troops to Greenland as a symbol of revolt against America. And these are words I don't think we would have talked about. So what does all this mean? It means headlines. And it's funny, when you get into headlines, they always kind of come out the same way. And by that, I mean, you can't really, you have to look at it and ask yourself, does the headline matter? Is it really relevant? And is it economic? So I'm not getting into whether or not any of this stuff is right or wrong. I mean, I'm not. That's not what we do on this podcast. I'll let Joe Rogan debate whether Greenland is a good idea or not. But when you think about where we are, the headlines this year to start the year are kind of tough. By the way, I'm doing my best talk more slowly and pronunciate better. I've got a good microphone, but when I've listened to my own podcast recently, sometimes I just start yapping along, and I'm a famous deep voice, bit of a mumbler that makes sometimes my stuff come out not clean. So I want to work on that this year. That's a 2026 effort for me to talk a little slower and pronunciate a little better. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to hit on was there's a lot that's happened. You think about Federal Reserve independence is up for debate just this week. Are tariffs really legitimate or not? The Venezuela issue, the ongoing policy debates about whether it's Greenland or you name it. We can go down the list here. Certainly, some of the things I've already mentioned. But it's worth remembering that unsettling news cycles do not translate to unsettled markets. Understand, unsettled news cycles do not translate to unsettled markets. Geopolitics generally don't affect markets. Policy debate, policy change generally don't affect markets. So I guess, and I've done this to you before, the easiest way to say this is don't panic. Don't let news cycles that are noisy detract you from the reality. Remember Liberation Day? For all the concern around Liberation Day and all the worry about what tariffs were going to do, our advice then was stay calm, buy the dip, and watch what happens. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. We care about economic cycles when there's a weakening in the labor market. Last week, we saw weekly jobless claims and continuing claims fall. Both fell quite a bit. So that tells me the labor market is still strong, not an issue whatsoever. We'll see if it becomes one. We're in this no hire, no fire world right now. We're not adding a lot of new jobs, but we're not seeing a lot of layoffs. So don't let the news cycle about what's happening out there, even the sentiment I gave around the president's numbers. Yet fourth quarter spending by the consumer was very strong. How on one hand you have strong consumer spending, and on the other hand some of this noise around polling? Because it's just that. It's an emotional reaction to a topic. And half the time these things don't even happen. Let's just call it what it is. The new Venezuelan leader seems to be amenable to be working with the president. So that they may have a fair election at some point over this year, later this year. If that happens, that's a gigantic win. What do we hear right now? How dare the president take over or capture a president from another country? I would argue from a human standpoint, that was the right thing, a social standpoint, protection of young women who are kidnapped and raped on a regular basis there. I think that's a real positive. But that's just personal. My point is, you don't want this bias you have around the news cycle dominating your thought. It's actually, to a great degree, Venezuela is a good example. For all the news cycle around the Venezuelan moment, it had no impact on markets whatsoever, and it has very little economic output. In fact, maybe in sometime over the next few years, we'll see more oil come to the market. Maybe the country gets better, but certainly today, it's really not a big deal at all. Confirmation bias can creep into policy debates. And by that, I mean you're looking for something to confirm maybe things are terrible out there, and then it makes you affect the way you look at the markets. You don't want to start doing something different because of policy. It just doesn't make any sense. You don't want to take action based on your emotions. And I'll stop here, but the bottom line to remember is that you want to have a long-term plan. You want to buy stocks that you know. You want to invest prudently so you have a balance of risk in your portfolio, bonds to stock. I always give you ideas about where we can go. I'll give you an example. I've been a big fan of small caps for the last 12 months, for the last 2 years. But if you look at how they've done year to date, absolutely murdering everything else, it would strongly suggest that the reason why they're doing well is because we expect a strong economy in 2026. The market is a great indicator as to whether or not the risks are real or not. So small caps doing well tell you, no, we're expecting economic growth, not economic failure. The bond market saying stable, not concerned about any of these headlines we see out there. So when you think about all this stuff and you get all worked up about it, it's a mistake. Don't panic. Stick to the plan. It's why we have this podcast. It's why we do these calls. And if you stick to the plan, you'll do just fine. All right, some things to talk about. I do want to mention that another round of EU tariffs or a retaliation against the United States in the EU is worth watching. I think it could bring some volatility to the market. Um, I get a little concerned when this stuff becomes economic. In a scenario where we could have a tariff battle again, I don't think Trump is going back to 100% tariffs or something like that. But certainly the bond market reacted a little bit and the interest rates went a little bit higher with some concern. Not a big deal. European leaders are going to meet this week to come up with a plan about working more closely with the U.S. There's the Davos summit right now, a big economic forum that happens in Switzerland every year. I'm sure this is going to be a hot topic. The president seems steadfast in this. Hopefully, there's a real now. Hopefully, this is just a salvo to kind of bring something to the table. There's got to be some progress made, and maybe the Greenland stuff being shut down, but it's worth watching this week. We did see some information come out last week, which is much more important to me. When I look at the data for last week, CPI. Now, consumer price inflation did come out. What we saw was a zero point 0.3 month-over-month increase, and then a core inflation increase of zero point 0.2. Core is much more important. Take out food and energy. So headline was up 2.7 year over year, and core up 2.6. Those are great numbers. Now, I'm still a little worried about some funkiness in the number from the shutdown, but by and large, that's exactly what we want, everybody. A growing economy. U.S. GDP is probably going to come in, growth domestic product, or how much the country grew over the last year, is probably going to come in somewhere around 2.5% for the year, 2.3. And if you can get inflation down to 2.7, even 2.6, those are great numbers. Those are really strong numbers. So the headline inflation data suggests that things were quite good. Producer price index, how much it costs to make things, which is similar to PPI. It's sort of the step before it. That came in a little hot. It came in zero point 0.2 matching expectation and then zero point 0.3 on a year over year basis, meaning put a different way, core PPI was flat for the month. And if you look at the total, there's a lot of energy in this food and energy prices. The price of goods rose zero point 0.9 for the month, and which is more than a 50% of the gain coming from gasoline prices in alone. So I'll put it a different way. I'm kind of mumbling this one together, trying to make sense of it. When you look at PPI, it really is pretty simple. The 3.1% year over year total rating, zero point 0.3 was the increase month over month, tells you that PPI in and of itself, a core PPI, what it costs to make stuff, is fairly okay. A little hotter than we wanted, not as good as the inflationary number, but I wouldn't get too caught up in it. The big one for me was retail sales. Retail sales did really well. It came in at 0.6% above consensus. So sales, excluding auto, gasoline, and building, were up 0.4. That's a really strong number. That puts retail sales up about 4% year over year for the year. That's a great number. That's really where we want to be. It shows expansion in retail sales. It means the consumers hanging in there and did really, really quite well. I think those are exciting components of some of the data that came out. We're going to get the big one this week. We're going to get PCE this week. And why I care about PCE, I say this every time, because that's the one the Federal Reserve cares about. Now, there's a lot going on with the Federal Reserve. I get it. And there's this talk about Lisa Cook will be in the news again this week because of what's happening with her case, whether she should be forced to step down, or more importantly, the idea of what could happen with a lawsuit against the Federal Reserve. There are a couple of senators against this. So that could be a headline this week for sure. But ultimately, we're going to get a new Fed governor here in May. The announcement of who that person's going to be replaced by should come relatively soon. Hopefully, it doesn't make Chairman Powell a lame duck. But more importantly, between now and then, the idea of what PCE is and what the latest data is really important. All right. For the week, last week, equity indexes were pretty much mixed. The S&P 500 was down 0.36. Some of that was due to the variance of headlines that we've already talked about. NASDAQ was down 0.66. The Dow was down 0.28. Now, get ready for this. Mid-cap stocks up 0.84 up. Small cap stocks up 2.05. Small caps year to date up 8%. The S&P 500 up 144. If you had just taken the first 2 weeks of this year and add them on the last year, small caps would have been the winner. Now, I know that's a goofy thing to say, but it's true. Anyway, EFA up 1.4, doing well, up 3.5 year to date, still beating the S&P, basically a double. And emerging markets up 5.78, really strong week. Bond market, Bond market's basically flat on the year. We gave up 14.14 last week, and that's because some of the rhetoric of yields going higher. This is some of those headlines I already talked about. Put it all together, a fairly calm week. Headlines are what they are. They can have short-term sort of volatility to the markets, but not a big deal. Some headlines I saw that I think are really pretty cool. Things I picked up that I was like, these were some fun headlines. When you think about the headlines that are going on out there, I guess I'd say never get caught up on them, but they're worth keeping an eye on. China is signing a deal with Canada or getting close to a deal with Canada. Could China replace the consumption that Canada puts out? Interesting. I think Canada still needs us greatly. I'm certain of that. But having Canada move towards China is interesting to me. Remember, China and countries like China got us into this mess. Meaning, when we exported our entire middle class to another country, it created this imbalance of people not making money for a couple of decades. I don't think we should ever go back there from an economic standpoint. I think Canada should be careful, but I understand why they would. We don't have the best relationship with them right now. Europe is cold this winter. And by the way, the whole world is a bit colder this winter. It's been a cold winter. Why do I care about that? Because when you don't make your own gas and oil, what does it mean for the United States? We export a heck of a lot of gas to Europe. We export more to Europe than we use in our own country. That's a big moneymaker. So you're going to see energy prices really hang in there and do very well for us, energy revenue. But probably keeps natural gas a bit higher, which means for us even a bit higher. I mean, I think you can't deny that some of this stuff out there is quite fascinating when it comes to Europe's trying to go green has created a real problem for them. And now, well, just like the Russia-Ukraine war, some of this stuff comes home to roost. I thought a fascinating article about tonight's game. You know, so I didn't talk about it. I should. Indiana and Miami. By the way, long story. I like pro football. I've become more of a college fan. But if you knew me for a long time, I was always a Los Angeles Rams fan. That was my favorite team as a kid. Always liked the Giants, but a Los Angeles Rams fan. Because I don't want to torture my daughters with being a fan of a team that's 3,000 miles away, I tell them we're Giant fans. But they know me well enough that here's I break it down this way. You're going to criticize me for this. 50% goes to me to the New York Giants, 45% to the Los Angeles Rams, and 5% to the New York Jets. Why? Because I used to have Jets season tickets with my brother, and I just feel so bad for the Jets. You can't. There's even a whole piece in the Wall Street Journal about the inadequacy of the New York Jets and their inability to succeed with multiple coaches and generations. I mean, just think about it. The New England Patriots are going back to the AFC Championship just a few years after losing Brady. The Jets have been trying for decades and can't win. Something's rotten at the core. I guess it's the owner. I'd have to blame it on Woody Johnson, but we'll see. Anyway, tonight, Indiana, this miraculous turnaround story. John Cougar Mellencamp is an Indiana Hoosier fan. There happens to be a billionaire who pumped a lot of money into them as well, but you can't guess who that billionaire is. So when you think about the Indiana Hoosiers, certainly it really is exciting that good for them. They've never won it, and uh, you know, let's call it what it is. You can't. The team was bought a bit. Um, I'm blanking out. Anyway, I'm losing my mind. I'm trying to think of who that other big donor is. I'm losing my mind. Shark Tank guy. What's wrong with me? Anyway, and then on the other side, there's Miami. And Miami, who Miami, it's a long story, but Miami a few years back got themselves in a lot of trouble. And the reason why they got themselves in a lot of, oh, Mark Cuban, sorry. Mark Cuban is the big donor that helped resuscitate or revive or create the Hoosiers dynasty with money. Every one of these players, including Mendoza, gets plenty of money. Well, the other one's Miami. Miami years ago was paying players under the table to make them part of the team. Famously, they give the lineman of the week money, a pool of money, and the pool of money was hundreds of dollars. With the money they were giving out then, you couldn't buy a guy a pen today or a lunch today. Now they have a $30 million NIL pool of money. Carson Beck, who I like Carson. A lot of people don't like Carson. I like Carson. I thought if the Bulldogs had Carson last year healthy, we would have beaten Notre Dame and gone to the final. I thought the play calling that got him hurt was ridiculous. It was so stupid what they did to that kid. But I also more importantly applaud him. Somebody offered him $4 million. I don't know that he's ever going to get that in the NFL. So go take your money. Good for him. And now he's in a national championship. Sometimes economics lead the way. I'd argue economics are the root cause of a lot of things in the world, especially when people get angry or do bad things because they don't have any money in their pocket. Story for another day. Anyway, tonight's game should be fun. Indiana versus Miami. Two teams that money bought, put together. But that's the way the world works. NIL is a real thing. It's a real thing. And I'm going to end with today my shout out of the week. By the way, if you hadn't asked me who I'm pulling for, I guess I'm pulling for Indiana. I think it's cool. Miami's won enough. So that's what I'm pulling for. And let's pull for those Los Angeles Rams. Why not? I thought I would give a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm going to read it to you because I don't know it off the top of my head. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. There's no perfect figure in American history. I know there's some knocks on Dr. King, and they find me a perfect hero that there is no such thing. But what I give Dr. King credit for, tremendous courage. My gosh, the man was unwavering, but his message of love. Look at Minneapolis right now. This poor woman that lost her wife. Should she have been there? I don't know. I mean, she's got a right to protest. Should with two kids at home, should she have been there? Probably not, but that's not my call. The way we get so angry with is screaming at cops and police officers trying to do their job. Not what happened? Where did we become so angry? I blame it on social media. At its core, social media is the the cause of some of this anger. I'm convinced of it. The amplifier we all have in our hand to make noise, and I think it's incredible. And I'm sad that we've got to this point. So at a time when there is so much anger out there, I mean, if you look at the number of deportees done by the three presidents prior to Trump, not including Biden, the three before them, which would be obviously George Bush, Obama, and Clinton, they deported many more people than Trump has deported. Yet the anger towards this is about an all-time level. And I'm not picking sides here. My mom and dad were legal immigrants, so I'm a fan of legal immigration. But for the guy that came here illegally and is cutting your grass outside, leave him alone. Get on my soapbox. Anyway, that's not important. At the end of the day, my shout out of the week goes to Dr. Martin Luther King. I hope that message of love resonates again. I hope we can find a way to turn down the heat and work to each other. I would say sometimes I do look at the good things. We have a lot less wars than we did 30, 40, 50 years ago. Poverty levels are higher than they were. AI can make things better for everybody as far as more efficiencies. You look at the ability for the rest of the world to feed each other with the advancement of technology for growing and so on. All these things are positive. So I always take the positive approach to it. But at a time when you see some of the headlines suggest that we need more love in the world, I hope Dr. Martin Luther King's message resonates. Have a wonderful week, everybody. I'll talk to you all real soon. Bye-bye.